Welcome to Across the Dietary Universe, a podcast where we bring experts along our voyage to discover the secrets of food and how it relates to each of our unique dietary profiles. From the origins of diets to current eating trends to the frontier of food innovation and the future of how we eat, we'll discover that when it comes to food, things are not necessarily as they seem. Honeycomb is a mobile app that works with your iPhone or Android device to help you find suitable food to eat at restaurants near you based on your specific dietary requirements. If you're plant-based and celiac, low FODMAP with a tree nut allergy, keto and dairy-free, we support countless dietary combinations and profiles. Based on your inputs, Honeycomb curates the best restaurants for you and the best options to order at those restaurants. If you have more severe allergies, don't worry. Honeycomb only recommends you places that have a clear protocol to deal with cross-contamination. Pre-order Honeycomb today at get.honeycomb.ai. Okay, Dave, so happy to have you with us here today on Across the Dietary Universe podcast. I would love to just jump into it and go into the intro. Let people know who is gluten-free Dave, because it seems that a lot of people know who you are, but who knows, you could use more people following you and hearing your message, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. So my name's Dave Stubler. I live in Kansas City, and I had a lot of digestive issues and a lot of health issues for much of my life. And about 5 years ago, figured out the root cause was celiac disease, or severe. It's not an allergy to wheat and gluten, but it's that's what sets it off. And so I kind of navigated it on my own. I didn't have much direction or help from my doctors, so I used a lot of online resources. And then a couple of years ago, my sons, encouraged me to start an Instagram page. And so it started out, just reviewing, just things that, we had in our kitchen cupboard, meals we ate. And I try to get a post up every day and just try to, show that, it is possible to eat normal type of food, even with these dietary restrictions. And I have a lot of fun doing that.
And what's normal type of food for you? What's your favorite things to eat?
So it could be absolutely anything. And so that's one of my challenges is like an old family recipe, and just find out how to recreate it at home. It could be fried chicken. It could be an old dessert, a cake my grandma used to make, or it could be one of my favorite meals from a restaurant we used to go to, that because of cross-contamination and other issues, I can't enjoy there. So I take a lot of pride in recreating those at home and making them delicious, where people with non-food allergies will enjoy them as well.
That's brilliant, and that's part of the reason that it caught our attention. I think so. You're so well, I don't want to say laissez-faire, as they say in French. I don't want to say that, because obviously you have to be so on the ball when it comes to celiac, but you're casual about it. You don't make it into you've integrated it, I would say, into your lifestyle very well. And that's probably, I think, why people really enjoy following you and viewing your material. And just to give people a little bit of context, I do have a little blurb on you here. And just to let people know that you are a full-time mechanical engineer in the defense and aerospace industry. Is that correct?
That's correct. Yeah.
So we'll get into that. Potentially CIA, who knows, the first celiac. Part-time Instagram influencer for gluten-free eating, as we've discussed. After many years suffering digestive issues, you were diagnosed with celiac and Hashimoto's thyroid disease, which I understand actually other people I've talked to have had that pairing together. They get Hashimoto's and they also are celiac as well. Autoimmunes, right. I guess sometimes they group together, unfortunately. And you were diagnosed with alpha-gal red meat allergy, which is a disease. I think it's quite a rare disease, although increasingly more popular. A disease picked up through a tick bite.
That's right.
And basically through trial and error, you became an expert in this, and here you are evangelizing and letting people know how, despite all the obstacles, you can still live, as you put it, relatively normalized life. And so, man, there's so much to talk about and unpack here, but I kind of like, okay, so we'll get into the celiac stuff, but
Mhm.
tell me about the tick situation, because
Right.
that seems like a nightmare.
Yeah, so it's I think the first case was diagnosed about 10 or 12 years ago. So it's still relatively, new on the understanding. And a lot of doctors aren't familiar with it. And so it's comes from a Lone Star tick. And the Lone Star tick has a little white dot on its back. So it
Mm,
kind of looks like the single star on the Texas flag.
right.
And it'll pass an antibody from a deer, to people, through the tick bite. And some people will develop this red meat allergy where others don't. And I unfortunately developed the red meat allergy. And so it was a tricky one to diagnose where it's a delayed reaction. So for somebody with a peanut allergy, you eat the peanuts or smell it or touch it, it's instant.
Hmm.
Well, the red meat is delayed about 4 to 6 hours.
Right.
And so I was keeping notes on what I was eating at the time of my reaction, and it was like an anaphylactic, and so very frightening, and not been able to connect the dots, but it's is in fact what I had the previous meal, which was important.
Wow,
And
that I mean that sounds like a spider web of different obstacles to get through, and distractions of what is causing it and what is the actual
mhm,
culprit.
right.
And so, how long did it take you from starting to get the symptoms to actually realizing it came from a tick? And how did you did they just do a test on you, or how did that happen?
Yes. So I started with my general practitioner, and they did allergy tests, went to allergists, and I didn't get tested for a while just because the people I was seeing weren't familiar with it. And then I went to a new allergist, and he had heard about it, read something about it, and so just on a whim, he says, "Well, let's go ahead and test me." And it's a blood test,
Uh huh.
so it's relatively easy to do. And I believe I was his first patient that was diagnosed with it.
Wow.
And they've been, like I said, it's about 12 years old, the disease, and they continued to do blood tests for some of the early patients, and the antibody levels drop over time, and so they feel that you can outgrow it after a while. And it's kind of some late breaking news for myself. I went back to my allergist about 2 weeks ago and
Okay.
got the blood test again, and my antibody, so normal is 0 to zero point 0.1, and I was at a 5.3, and I'm currently at a 1.2. And so he thinks that my levels may be low enough that I might be able to reintroduce red meat.
Interesting.
Yes. So next month I go back to the doctor, and so I'll have red meat for breakfast, and then they'll observe me for 4 to 6 hours to make sure there's no reaction, and then we'll go from there. So I
Wow.
might be almost outgrown from this, so I'm pretty excited about that.
Right. And my understanding is that people do outgrow allergies, but perhaps more early on in life, and not
Right.
later. And so that's quite
Mhm.
rare that you're able to do that. Is it known that this specific allergy has like a half-life to it that you can outgrow it?
Yeah, I've heard, and the doctor I've seen said that he has had several other patients who their numbers drop enough where they can tolerate red meat again. So it's starting to become understood. 10 or 15 years, and
Right.
and I don't know exactly when I got the tick bite, and I'm guessing it was 2009, 2010. So it's been 10 or 12 years I've been dealing with it. So,
Wow.
but
What a struggle to come out of nowhere.
oh,
Probably maybe some camping trip or something like that. A walk around.
exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, both of my sons are Eagle Scouts, and so we did a lot of camping,
Uh huh.
and we had ticks on us all the time. But it's no big deal. Didn't think about it. And
Uh huh.
one of those was got me. So
Just got unlucky, unfortunately. Well, hopefully that the next test renders some nicer looking results for you.
exactly.
When were you diagnosed with celiac? When you were young?
So it was 5 years ago. Actually
Oh,
next week.
okay.
Yeah,
So you had your first allergy ever was the tick-based allergy?
I didn't get that diagnosed until 4 years ago,
Oh,
and
okay.
so I was struggling with that for about 6 years.
Uh-huh. And are you also intolerant to dairy? Do you have an allergy to dairy?
That's something new. Yeah, I went dairy free about a month and a half ago. And so I was diagnosed with EOE, which stands for something, and it's another autoimmune disease, and this one is for the esophagus. And
Wow.
where Crohn's disease is autoimmune in your lower intestine,
Yeah.
celiac is autoimmune in your small intestine,
Yeah.
and EOE is autoimmune in your
In your
esophagus.
esophagus. Interesting. Um,
So,
well, that's rough to hear that.
mhm.
Hopefully they I imagine they have some sort of like medication or anything for that, some diet,
Yeah,
anything?
yeah, it's all diet. Just avoid dairy, and most common culprits are dairy and wheat.
Right.
And so I dropped dairy about a month and a half ago, and that seems to have relieved all my symptoms.
Oh, excellent.
And so for
Excellent.
some people have to go to like eggs is another common one.
Hmm.
Fortunately, I can tolerate eggs, and then there's a couple other allergens that can kick that off.
Got it. I mean, that rings true and close to home from my experience because I was diagnosed with ulcerative colitis, which is
Okay.
basically like the cousin of Crohn's disease of the
Mm-hmm.
lower intestine. How do you manage it? So you have celiac, you're staying
Mm-hmm.
away from red meat, and now you have dairy intolerance. And so how do you deal with that? Because I did find that um, in in your posts that you make, you talk about the app Find Me Gluten Free, which is
Right.
great if you're basically only celiac. But once
Mm-hmm.
you start adding other things into the mix, now you have to parse even further through menus and so on. How have you
Right.
found that over the last little while managing three different things?
Right. So it's tough, and so you're right. So I always start with the Find Me Gluten Free, and then it's going through the menus, making phone calls to restaurants, and in some cases talking to the chef or the preparers to understand what the ingredients are, and sometimes they get substitute and make it special, but other times it's not because the kitchen is busy and cross contamination and things.
Right. And
But
like, how did you feel when you first got diagnosed with celiac? Because it must have come as such a shock.
absolutely, yeah, and so the longer I've been off of gluten, the more like reactive I am to it, the more sensitive. I think my body's let its guard down, and so that cross contamination is become a big deal for me.
Mm,
And so I would go to a restaurant at the beginning, and I could if it was relative gluten free ingredients, I'd be okay. But then I'd go back to these restaurants a couple months later, and now I'm getting sick again, and then start learning about cross contamination, shared fryers, just kitchen space in general, and so it's tough. There's very few restaurants that we can go to, especially in Kansas City, who can accommodate that. And so it's really had a big impact not only on me but my entire family.
right.
If we want to go out to dinner, it's very limited, and so sometimes we'll be somewhere that special for the kids that they want to go to a restaurant, and let's all go and just drink a glass of wine or a
Right.
cup of coffee and just just there for the socialization part of it. And so I mean that at first I was kind of, I don't know, annoyed that the other places couldn't always accommodate me, but
Mm,
now I'm accepting of it, and so that's just the way it is. And in fact, our home kitchen, I kept getting sick at home, and I had my separate food, separate toasters and everything, and so 2 years ago, our home kitchen went gluten free, and
uh-huh.
now I don't get sick at home anymore. And so just knowing that we couldn't keep me safe at home, just
Yeah.
my I can't hardly expect some stranger in a kitchen at a restaurant,
Right.
to go that extra mile either. So
So there's a couple things there, right? And I think I'll get to the restaurants, but the
mhm.
at-home situation, I've heard actually from other celiac families, or at least one member of the family celiac, like the mom or the dad, and the easiest way, the best way is if you do have that safe space in your own home,
Mhm.
because the worst thing is like you don't feel safe anywhere, right?
Right.
So well done to your family for taking one for the team, I guess. But they can always go out and get their bread fix somewhere else,
Exactly.
right?
Right.
And
Right.
gluten free is not. I mean, there's so many amazing brands
Hmm.
for different products, which I'm sure that you're very familiar with at this point, and your followers
Hmm.
are as well. I want to touch on the restaurant side of things, because there's three camps as far as I'm concerned for celiacs. the way that I have done my research and spoken to so many different, customers, users, etc. We work together with the BC chapter. We're in Vancouver, by the way. We work together with the BC chapter of the Canadian Celiac Association. And they rejected so many apps until we came along because we really did a lot of research. And the three camps that I see are the ones that say, you know what, I have celiac, but I don't feel anything immediately, so I'm going to go do whatever. And if it says gluten-free or gluten-friendly, I'm just going to go with that option with no care at all for cross-contamination, right? And that's sometimes the people who maybe are recently diagnosed, or they're a little bit more cavalier, perhaps they're a bit younger, taking a bit more chances. And the thing that's interesting with celiac that I didn't understand before is that you can actually get you can damage your body without knowing, without getting immediate symptoms. And so you're hurting yourself and so it seems like, oh, this gluten-free pizza crust is fine, even though it's cooked in the same oven. So there's that camp number one, perhaps the unenlightened, we can call them. And then the second camp would be people who are comfortable actually going to restaurants with, let's say, like a dedicated preparation method or dedicated protocol, dedicated deep fryer, for example. And for the vast majority, I would say sort of live in that second group where gluten-free is not enough. It's almost meaningless. It's whether or not it's prepared in the right way. However, they'd still be comfortable going to a place that has non-gluten-free dishes. And then the third camp would be sort of the very strict, where they would only go to restaurants that are 100% gluten-free. There's nothing on the premises. Sorry, that was a long sort of rant, but I just wanted to make it clear for our listeners. Would you agree with those three camps generally?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And I generally live between camp 2 and 3.
Got it.
And so it has to have a dedicated space and, a dedicated, cooking equipment, utensils, and then the completely gluten-free restaurants, that's a no-brainer. And so there's certain parts of this, the U.S. where, like Pacific Northwest, Portland, Seattle, Vancouver, there's a lot of gluten-free options.
Right.
Boulder, Colorado is very friendly. We were recently in Austin, Texas, again, a good, a lot of gluten-free options, but in Kansas City, Missouri, around this area, there's not much of anything.
And what do you think is the reason for that? They're just a little bit, lagging behind the general population, or they're stuck in their traditional style. Like, what would it take for Kansas to have a dietary revelation?
I don't know what that would be, because Kansas City, I don't think it has that big of a base of people who are looking for that.
And so, do you ever take it upon you to try to convince a restaurant to say, hey, do you mind thinking about adding some options? There are people like me out there.
A lot of it's misunderstood with just gluten-free diet, because I think, being gluten-free has become a little bit trendy.
Yeah.
Where people did, because some celebrities are. And so they're, tend to be, they say they're gluten-free, but they're very cavalier. And so a lot of the restaurants will observe that behavior. They may even see the customer make a big deal about ordering their meal, and then they eat a roll.
Right.
And so I think a lot of the restaurants don't take it seriously because of that.
When we talk about dietary restrictions, there's people who hate mushrooms and onions, and there's people who will go into anaphylactic shock, right? And then everyone in between. And so how do you feel about this actually being, to some degree, a social issue where we're almost discriminated against by people laughing or not taking seriously the needs of actually quite a significant amount. If you combine all of the people with medically diagnosed dietary needs. Right.
Absolutely. And then, like, I would sometimes order a salad and it comes out and has croutons on it. And, I'd remind me, I can't eat this. I need you to make a new salad. And they said, well, we'll just pick them off. And I'm like, no, I'm sorry. Once it's touched, I can't eat it.
Right.
And so they take the salad back, and then I have a new one within 2 minutes. And I'm like, there's no way you had time to make another one. And then, I'm the type of person who will avoid confrontation.
Right.
And so I'll just say, okay,
no,
just
thanks.
box it up. We'll take it home and somebody else can eat it. I'm not going to not going to go any further with them. So,
Right. Well, the idea is also not to have confrontations when it comes to
mhm.
dining out. Like it shouldn't be, it should never even escalate
All
to
right.
to having and we call it here ingredient Tetris sometimes before you
Mhm.
order. And the idea is that okay, the less we can play that back and forth, the better. Of course, it's always good to confirm, but I think
Mhm.
something that needs to happen is first of all, we know the education, but also ingredient transparency because
Mhm.
likewise, with your disease for celiac disease, you now also have to concern yourself with red meat. You have to concern yourself with dairy. And
Yep.
what we do here at Honeycomb is actually give you the ability to combine different allergens, to combine different restrictions together, and to just find exactly what you're looking for. But that can never happen without restaurants opting in for
Mhm.
ingredient transparency. I'm excited to see the future of the dietary landscape. And I'm curious to know your opinion on the future because my understanding is that if you have celiac, it's really hard to order using like DoorDash and Uber Eats and any of these services.
Exactly.
How do you go about that? Like, are you waiting for that next service or feature to come for you?
Yeah, and exactly. And I wouldn't do the DoorDash or the Uber Eats or things like that because it's not possible to have that conversation with the person who's going to prepare it. Please change your glove, change utensils, pull from a new
Yeah.
container, and so yeah, having that next step, that'd be a game changer.
Got it. And how has technology helped you so far in your challenge? Do you use like the NEMA sensor, for example?
So I have a NEMA sensor, and I know I have, the capsules are not available very often. The company was sold a couple years ago,
That's right.
and so I would rely on that a lot when I'd go to a restaurant, especially if I hadn't been there before. And so that's the little capsules are $6 a piece, so
Uh-huh.
it's adds price to the meal, but it's worth it for that peace of mind. Just that double check after you get that plate in front of you.
Right. So just checks and checks before you go, checks and
Hmm.
balances during the conversation, and then finally the
Yep.
last piece of confidence. Because really, if you do get sick, like you probably can't even work for like a week, right?
So my symptoms are, once about a half hour after the meal, I'll start throwing up,
Oh my
and
God.
I'll throw up until my entire meal's gone. So it'll take a couple hours, and then I think so. It's kind of a curse and a blessing where I don't consume much of it. It just Yeah, and so I have the like the brain fog and some of that kind of
Right.
lingering issues, but it's not as debilitating as some people's symptoms are.
Got it. Well, it seems like it's very acutely debilitating, at least,
Absolutely.
which
Oh
is
yeah.
it's not very fun if you're out with friends.
No. Or we're on a road trip,
Yeah.
so it gets challenging.
And we know that you're a connoisseur of gluten-free beer.
Right.
Have you been sort of becoming like a salesperson? So when you go to restaurants, hey, why don't you carry this gluten-free beer?
Yeah, and so Holiday Breweries in Golden, Colorado, and they just started distributing to Kansas City, and I think it was March.
Uh huh.
And so I've gotten to know their distributor and their sales rep, and so I can talk to them directly, and they stocked it in the liquor store 5 miles from my front door, and they asked me what restaurants I want to see it at, and so I've been fortunate to get that connection, and yeah, so then and they're very responsive, and once it's in the restaurant, and they give them a poster so other
Right.
customers are aware of it,
Right.
and it's been well received across the city.
Yeah, I think it's great. I actually have tried gluten-free beer before, and it's delicious. There's
Mm-hmm.
nothing. I mean, I don't have a ton of alcohol to begin with, so I don't know
Mm-hmm.
that I'm a huge beer connoisseur. But it would be really cool to start seeing even craft beers, and
Mm-hmm.
we'll see. It's what's yet to come for the gluten-free beer situation. But
Right.
very very cool. How have you? I mean, you're here. You are gluten-free Dave, as
Mm-hmm.
people probably refer to you now. But how do
Right.
you feel being an influencer? You seem like the type of guy who did not ask for this to happen.
No, no, not at all. And it's very surprising to me because I do a post every day, and it's kind of grown, and it's funny. My son's friends, they all call me gluten free Dave,
Hmm.
and I enjoy cooking for them. They'll
Hmm.
come over, and or they'll see a post that I made 2 weeks ago and they say, hey, we'd like to try that. So they'll come over, I'll make dinner for them, or,
Wow.
cakes or cookies. And so I have a lot of fun with it. And it is kind of a way, really for me to connect with my kids,
Right.
because that's where they're at. And so at the same time I went to Instagram, my wife started a Snapchat account.
Okay.
And so again, just so we can connect with our kids, go to where they're at. And so it's kind of, I had no idea that this was going to, grow into what it is. And I'm having a lot of fun with it.
And you started a few years ago, you said?
Yeah, it was, I think it was about 2.5 years ago.
How many followers do you have now?
About 12,000.
That's a huge milestone for.
It is. Yeah. And I think one of the things that make me stand out is, being a man. Like on Instagram, gluten free, there's not many men out there that are active. It's a lot of, primarily women, and 90% of my followers are women.
That's a great, it's an interesting insight. And I was actually telling Marina that, I mean, you're the first guest that we've had who's a man.
Okay.
And because in the wellness space, there's many women influencers, which is great. But it is cool to see it from a different perspective. But I wonder if there is an underlying reason for that. Perhaps, and this ties into, something that we picked up from some of your posts regarding some, family and friends' reactions. Sometimes that could be, accusatory of being selfish, of being a baby, of being weak. And a lot of times people think actually of people with dietary needs. If you have dietary needs, it's just that you're a bit weak and, you can't handle it, and they can handle it in other parts of the world. But in North America, we're a bit weaker and stuff. So do you think maybe perhaps there's some embarrassment there and people not willing to identify with having an autoimmune condition like this?
Yeah, I think there could be. And a lot of it is, not wanting to acknowledge it either. Just knowing that you have issues and just knowing how much you would have to give up to deal with them, and just kind of that, denial.
Right. It says that you're part of, I don't know if you're just promoting this, but this was new to me. I didn't realize that this existed. A celiac cruise?
Yeah. So celiac cruise. So there's a lady who named Maureen Basie. And so she worked with Royal Caribbean, just started her own, company, and organized a cruise where you needed 500 people to fill a dining room. And once she filled the dining room, then she could get a dedicated kitchen. So all the food was safe and clean, no cross-contamination. And so we went to the inaugural cruise last year just as a guest. And at the time I didn't know her, but I've since gotten to know her. And so the next cruise will be in March, and they've got 1,000 people. So it'll be 2 full dining rooms.
Wow.
And so it's really, really growing.
So 1,000 celiac families, basically.
Exactly. Wow. Yeah. And so a ship holds 3,000 people. So now it would be up, a third of that. And the bigger your group becomes, now there'll be a, dedicated buffet up on the top deck. There'll be, other, things around, and even at the private island, they'll set up, a dedicated, food for us. And so it's just pretty exciting.
That's really nice. Now, obviously that's utopia. That's paradise for anyone with celiac. One question that we ask, because this is a podcast across the dietary universe, of course, we combine everything together, but we also look at the future of food and how things are going to evolve. And I personally believe that we're at the sort of the cusp of a renaissance, or an enlightenment when it comes to the effects that food has on our bodies, and transparency when it comes to that. No more of the big Coca-Cola corporations just doing whatever they want. I think that's starting to phase out a little bit, and it's going into not the regular meal, but the cheat meal category. That fair enough, eat the donuts, eat the cake, drink the soft drinks, but that's not the, the day-to-day. How do you see the future of food over the next, few years, over the next 10 years, 20 years? What do you think is going to happen, by the time your kids have kids?
I certainly hope that we had matured. And I also hope that there's a bigger, social understanding of how we got to all these food allergies. Because I think 50 years ago, food allergies were rare. And so I don't know if it's the chemicals they use for the growing the crops? Is it the genetic engineering, the genetically modified food so it grows faster, drought resistant, bigger yields? I don't know,
Right.
but I fear they're turning our food into a chemical, and so I think just go back to more organic, natural,
Right.
farming and raising food as mainstream, right? Yeah, I
Yeah.
think I heard somebody was talking about, and so I think a lot of the innovations in the food is to drive the cost down,
Right.
but the penalty is actually what it is we're eating, and I saw somebody was talking about you can go to McDonald's and get a hamburger for $1. You get the bun, the meat, the cheese, the toppings, the whole thing for $1. But then you go to the grocery store and you buy one bell pepper, and it's $1.50. It's
Yeah.
like, so it's going to be that constant struggle between cost and quality of food, and yeah.
Right. Yeah. Well, hopefully there, better times to come for us folks with dietary needs. But thankfully, there's people evangelizing like yourself and soldiers on the ground, trying to get the work done. So we might see a brighter future. Anything that you wanna plug, or just to tell people if they're celiac and they want to follow you, go to your Instagram?
Yeah, that's the place to find me at this point. And again, I learned a lot through Instagram, just about cross contamination, about products that are out there,
Mm-hmm.
and I welcome people to direct message me. I'm happy to give advice, help out where I can, and again, just kind of give back some of that I've learned from that platform.
That's so great. Well, we really appreciate that. Did you ever think when you were diagnosed that a few years later you're going to end up doing podcasts about it?
No idea. Never crossed my mind.
I love that.
Yeah.
I love that. Well, I mean, I wish you well. I hope the next tests come out well for you and you get the results that you're looking for. Thanks so much for being on, Dave. I really appreciate it.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me. I had a blast.
Awesome.